Today, I want to deal with a very specific question that I get asked a lot, and that's when churches or ministry organizations launch a media ministry, what do we name it? What do we call that media ministry, particularly when it comes out of a church or a ministry organization? Do we call it the same? Do we come up with something new? What is that all about, and what should I consider? If you're in that situation, if you're a church or a ministry and are launching a media ministry or have one, I want to talk today about the secrets of how to come up with a great name. Hi, I'm Phil Cooke, and thank you so much for joining us. You know, my book, Maximize Your Influence, people are talking about it, how to make digital media work for your church, your ministry, and you. Let me tell you something. If you don't have this book yet, you need to get it. If you're a leader of any organization, this is the book for you. It doesn't go into technical stuff. It's not about how to build a website. It's about why we need to build it and what goes into one that really does matter. And social media, it covers publishing, it covers broadcast television, covers all kind of things that you have to deal with in the digital media world today. And I just can't think of a pastor in America that shouldn't have this book because it's absolutely critical and will answer so many questions you have. And one of those questions that I get a lot from pastors is, I'm launching a media ministry out of my church, either locally or nationally, regionally, whatever, but I don't know what to name it. Should I name it after the church? Should I name it after me? Should I come up with something else? You know, naming used to be fairly simple. We've worked with just tons and tons of churches and ministry organizations and nonprofits over the years, helping them come up with a new name. And it used to be very simple, but then so many churches started launching those hipster names, those cool names, which I love, Elevation, Destiny, all those kind of things that are really great names, but after a while you run out of words. What can we call our church? And a lot of churches are based on names for the development they're in. Lakewood Church was a development outside of Houston, Texas, and that's where they started. Hillsong was kind of a combination of a number of things there in the hills area of Sydney, Australia. And so we find that certain churches have a name that works, some doesn't, some works locally, some names don't work locally. Once you get out from your area, the local name doesn't really matter anymore. And then again, you have denominations. If you're the Fourth Baptist Church or the Third Presbyterian Church of something, how does that really work when you start doing a national media ministry? So the problem is we have questions. So I want to talk a little bit about 4 keys that I think are important, and 4 alternatives, I should say, when it comes to naming your media ministry. Number 1, your media ministry may begin at a church, but I don't think that's necessarily a good reason to name your ministry after the church, because very often, as I said, that name is only good locally. And again, Lakewood is a good example. There are others that are a good example. I wouldn't call your media outreach, which is going to go far beyond your community, the name of a ministry or a church that only has meaning locally. I tell pastors a lot that when you're launching a media ministry, I like to do a local version of the program that drives people to church, encourages people to visit and be a part of the church. However, outside of your area, people aren't going to go to your church. If you're broadcasting from Dallas, but your program is being shown in Los Angeles, I'm never going to come and visit your church in Dallas. So it doesn't really need to be connected by that name, because that's not so important when you talk about a national media ministry. Prestonwood is another example. Jack Graham's great church in Plano, Texas, outside Dallas, called Prestonwood. That was an area, that was a part of town, has meaning there, but it wouldn't have meaning in Chicago or Atlanta or some other city. So don't necessarily feel like you have to name your media ministry based on the name of your church or even your local ministry or nonprofit, whatever that happens to be. The second approach is what I call a unique ministry name. For instance, Jack Graham at Prestonwood Church calls his media ministry PowerPoint. Jensen Franklin calls his media ministry Kingdom Connection. And Rick Warren at Saddleback Church here in California, he calls his national radio outreach Daily Hope. So it's a completely different name for your media ministry. Now, the upside of that is it can really stand alone. It's a unique name that really does matter. However, the downside is chances are when people are looking for Jensen Franklin's television program, they're searching for Jensen Franklin. They're not necessarily searching for Kingdom Connection. Same way with Rick Warren. I'll bet you $1 that when people are searching for Rick Warren's radio program, they're searching for Rick Warren. They're not searching for Daily Hope. So although a name may transcend your local area, your geographical region, and it may be a great name, it's really hard to figure out how people are going to search for you and how they want to find you. I know with Joyce Meyer, for instance, is a great example. When I first went in to consult with her many, many years ago, her ministry name was Enjoying Everyday Life. But we did some studies and we found out most of her donors and partners didn't even know what that name was. They didn't even know that name. They would always search for Joyce Meyer. So we had to make some changes along that line. And the ministry till today is called Enjoying Everyday Life, but we put Joyce's name in a real high level there. Now, the third thing you can do is name it after the speaker, the pastor, the teacher, the leader, whatever. And you see this with the Billy Graham Association. You see this with Oral Roberts Ministry. You see it with plenty of others out there that are really based on the name of the speaker. And that was a very popular thing in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s in particular, to name it after a speaker, because it became Joyce Meyer Ministries, or it became, any number of, all the ministry leaders out there that these ministries are named after. Now, that is a great thing from the perspective that it helps people searching. If I'm looking for content from the Billy Graham organization, I'm going to Google Billy Graham. For Oral Roberts, I'm going to Google Oral Roberts. I'm looking for Joyce Meyer. I'll Google Joyce Meyer. Anybody like that, John MacArthur, I'll generally will look for John MacArthur. So the names are important, but you run into problems with succession. So what do we do with the Billy Graham organization now that Billy Graham's passed and Franklin Graham, his son, has taken over? What do you do with Oral Roberts Ministry once Oral Roberts has passed and Richard Roberts, his son, has taken over? What do you do? It's just an awkward thing for a new ministry leader to step up and be working under the name of somebody else. Even though that somebody else was famous, even though that somebody else was a real magnet for donors and support, and that's great. You want to keep that. However, it's just really awkward for new generations of leaders. If you want the ministry to have a long life beyond that first founder, then you got to think, do I really want that founder's name out there as the lead thing? Now, so succession becomes a real problem. Now, the fourth option is my personal recommendation, and that is really combining my second choice with my third choice. In other words, have a media ministry name. As I said, Jack Graham is PowerPoint, Jensen Franklin, Kingdom Connection, Rick Warren, Daily Hope. Have a ministry name, but use the ministry leader's name in there as well. So it becomes PowerPoint with Jack Graham, or Jack Graham and PowerPoint. It becomes Jensen Franklin and Kingdom Connection, or Kingdom Connection with Jensen Franklin. You tie both together, and that's really important. I'll tell you why. The name will transcend a generation. So when you step down, when Jack Graham decides years from now to step down, or when Jensen Franklin decides to retire or move away from doing the media ministry and brings on someone else to hopefully continue that, you can drop his name, but you still have the name of the ministry out there. So it becomes PowerPoint with Phil Cooke. It becomes Kingdom Connection with Phil Cooke. It becomes different, but there's enough of that original name in there to keep people understanding who this is, what it's about, and what it represents. So I hope you understand that. And that's really important. I know a lot of pastors, this is not a long podcast today, but I know a lot of pastors are concerned about that. They're thinking about launching. And we have 3 churches we've worked with during the pandemic, during the shutdown, that decided to go on broadcast television. We had helped them tweak their live stream to the point it was getting such great results that they said, hey, let's put this on so the community can see it. But that means they start thinking, do we need a name for it that's different from the church? Now, locally, as I said before, we kept, in all 3 of the situations, we kept their names tied to the church. But if they decide to go national, which one of those churches is planning to do right now, we're in this discussion. What do we want to do for the name? Should it reflect the church? Should it only reflect the pastor speaker? Or should it be a different name? And so, as I said, I'm going for my suggestion 2 and 3, a different name with the pastor's name connected to it. And that helps you transition through a succession. Hopefully it can let the ministry continue for many generations to come, and that'll make a difference for a longer time. So we're here at Cooke Media Group, and if you have questions about it, I encourage you to drop us an email. We'd be happy to answer. If you want to go take this next level, we have a whole program that we take people through, take churches through, and ministry organizations and nonprofits through to help them understand the power of changing a name. So it's very important. I've talked a lot about people decide in 4 to 8 seconds what they think of you. This is a attention-driven culture, which means that I don't care how great your program is, how great your media is, how great your church is, if we can't capture their attention long enough to hear it, we have failed. So we have to think today about capturing attention in the first few seconds, and the key very often is the name. That most people will decide based on the name whether they want to continue to listen or whether they want to move on. So never has a name for your church, your ministry, your nonprofit been more important. And the same is true really for a business. The same is true for your business. And I would even use these same principles for business leaders. So if you know anybody, if you know pastors, ministry leaders, business leaders who are struggling with what to do about changing their name as they grow, if they should change it or not, send in this podcast. Let them see it. Let them watch it. I think it's important that they understand these principles because it will really help them understand what works most effectively and help them relax a little and know the name they're going to pick really does work. Thanks so much for watching. Again, comment on this thing. I'd love to know your thoughts. I'd love to know how you feel. Don't forget my blog at philcooke.com. We're doing some new things at our nonprofit, the Influence Lab. My wife, Kathleen, has really redesigned the site, and we're rethinking how we want to do that because remember, its focus is to help train people internationally to use the media to share the gospel. And many, being international and many of the places we're invited to come, they can't afford to bring us. They can't afford to go through the training. So we want to help raise the money to go to many places on this planet to help Christians use media more effectively because I think it's so much of an issue out there. And of course, maximize your influence. Get my book. It's really vital. If you're a leader, you need to get this book because it will give you a lot of the keys to understanding how digital media works and getting your message out there and trying to make an impact. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.